All right, guys, so we know that our login form is now connected to our local strategy inside our Passport config file. So what we need to do now is check for the user. Okay, that's going to be the first step. So we're going to use our user model and call find one. Okay, so we want to pass in an object here, and we're going to say find where email matches the email that's passed in. Okay, remember we were logging the email that was passed in, and we want to see if there's a user with that email. Okay, it's going to return a promise, and then inside here it'll return a user. Okay, so we're going to set that, and we're going to check for that user. This will be an if else. So if a user is found, actually let's check for not user, and we don't even need an else. So we're just going to say if there's not a user, then we want to return done. Okay, done is this function, where is it? Right here, that's being passed in. And what this takes is it takes an error as the first parameter. So we're going to say null as the error. And then the second parameter is the user. Now, since there is no user, we're going to return false. Okay, and then the third will be the message that's going to be sent, and we put that inside of an object like this, and we're going to say no user found. All right, now we should actually be able to test this if we put in a user that doesn't exist. So let's go back to our login, and let's put in just we'll say test at test.com. That user does not exist. Let's submit. And nothing happens. Let's see. So we're not getting our error. Actually, I think I know why. It's just not outputting in our template. Let's go to our partials and then our errors.handlebars. Yeah, right here, we're looping through errors that we created, but Passport is going to set just an error variable, not errors like we did. We set an array that we're looping through, but Passport, we want to check for just error. All right, so, and if there is an error, then let's just copy this, paste that in, and it's going to be just the error that we're going to output. Okay, it's not an actual object with a text value like we did. So let's go ahead and try that. We'll save. Let's reload. Let's put something in here that we know isn't in the database. And there we go. No user found. Okay, so let's go back to our Passport.js, and then we're going to move on. So there's no user found. It's going to just return that, give us the message. Now, what if there is a user found? What do we want to do next? We want to check the password, right? Because just finding the user isn't enough. We need to make sure the password matches. Now, remember, the password is hashed, and this password getting passed in from the form is not. So this is where we need to use bcrypt. All right, so let's put a comment. We'll say match password. Let's put one right here, and we'll say, actually, we'll put it up here. We'll say match user. So match the user. If the user matches, we're going to move along, and we're going to say bcrypt.compare. Okay, this is going to get passed in password, which is our unencrypted password that's coming from the form. And then we also want the encrypted password, what we can get from user.password. Now this user right here is coming from here. Okay, if it found a user, then it has the password attached to it, which is encrypted. So what it's going to do is it's going to compare the non-encrypted password or the non-hashed password to the hashed password. Okay, and then it takes in a callback, and that callback is going to have an error, and then it's going to have a true or false value, which we'll call isMatch. All right, so let's check for the error. So if error, we'll just go ahead and throw it. All right, and now we want to check to see if it's a match. So if isMatch, This will also have an else. If is match means that the password that the user typed in matched. So what we want to do is return done, pass in null for the first one because that's the error. We have no error we're returning. And then the second will be the user itself. Okay, and if the user is returned, that means that everything's okay, the password matched. In the else is if the password doesn't match. So what we want to do is basically we can copy what we did here. We're going to return null for the error, false for the user because it didn't match, so we definitely don't want to return the user, and then the message, which will be password incorrect. All right, and that should do it. So let's save. Let's go back to our login form. Let's put in a user that does match, or a user that will be found, and then a password that does not match. And we get password incorrect. All right, now before we move any further, before I try and actually log in, there's a couple more things we need to do. First of all, we need to add a serialize user and deserialize user function. So if we go to, let's say, passport.js, and let's see, let's go to the documentation and let's search for serialize. So basically right here, we need to add these two things. And this is all about sessions. So in a typical web application, the credentials used to authenticate will only be transmitted during the login request. If it succeeds, a session will be established and it will be maintained via a cookie set in the user's browser. All right. And then each subsequent request will not contain credentials, but rather a unique cookie that identifies the session. In order to support login sessions, Passport will serialize and deserialize user instances to and from the session. So we need to grab these two right here, and we're going to put these right inside of our config file. So let's go right below, right here. You still want to be inside of the exports function right here. So right there, and we're going to paste that in. All right, now this is good. This is fine because we're using Mongoose, and find by ID is actually a Mongoose function. All right, if you were using something like the native MongoDB driver or Mongo.js or some other ORM to deal with MongoDB, you might have to change this function up, but this is fine for us because we're using Mongoose. All right, both of these are fine. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And then I think there's one more thing we need to do, and that's to add the middleware, which is, let's see. It's passport.session and passport. Right here. Passport.initialize and passport.session, and we're going to add that to our app.js. Now, it's very, very important that you put this after your session, your express session middleware, all right, or you're going to have issues. So right here, we're going to put this in. Okay, so you don't have to go and copy this, just type this in, passport initialize and session. And I'm just going to say passport middleware. All right, save that. So now let's go and try and log in. So I'm going to put the correct email and the correct password, submit, and we get redirected to ideas, which is exactly what should happen. Now, right now we're logged in, but we have no way to really tell. So when you're logged in, you have access to a request object called user. Okay, request.user. So what I like to do is create a global variable for that object, and then we can use that anywhere. We can use that in our template, and we can say, look, if there's a user, if user, then hide login and register, okay, or show video ideas or whatever. So what we're going to do is create another global variable. I'm going to say res.locals.user and set it to request.user or null if it's not there. Okay, because this will only be here if we're logged in. If not, then this will get set to null. So let's save that, and then let's go to our nav bar, which is right here, nav bar, and we only want the login and register to show if we're not logged in, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab both list items for login and register. I'm going to cut, and then I'm going to put in an if statement right here. I'm going to say if user, because remember, now we have this global user object that represents the logged in user. And then I'm going to surround this list item, which is the drop down. We're going to say else if, and then paste in that. Okay, so what this should do is it's going to check to see if we're actually logged in, if there's a user. If it is, it'll show the little drop down. If not, it'll show the login and register. So let's save and reload. Now it shows the login and register, and the reason for that is every time we save a JavaScript file, a Node.js file, it's going to log us out. We're going to have to log back in. All right, every time we restart our application, it's going to log us out. So we're going to do a lot of logging back in. So let's go ahead and say login. Let's put in our credentials, submit, and now notice that the login and register link is gone, and the video ID is here. This is telling us that we're now logged in. Okay, we have access to that request.user object, which has our ID in it. Okay, now what I want to do in the next video is we need a way to log out, because right now the only way to log out is to restart the server. So in the next video we'll go ahead and we'll create a logout link and a logout route.